Hello everyone, Vest3D here, and today we're going to see how we can install the latest Mainsail 2.1 and configure and install the new time-lapse features. Pretty awesome stuff. Stay tuned. So if you are like me, you are running the latest available version of Mainsail, which was 2.0. And then just recently they released Mainsail 2.1 with a lot of cool features. And I think this is the greatest update so far because it's bringing a lot of new stuff and mainly built-in time-lapse function. And this is what we're going to talk on this video. But first of all, just a quick video on what's new. We're not going to go through everything because there's a lot, but just quickly going to show you the cool interface now. First thing first, you'll notice you have this option of running like the prompt interface kind of control for your motion system, which is it's more convenient than what it was before, and it looks also better in my opinion. That's one thing. You'll also notice that we have now a G-code viewer. This is cool stuff. You can see that by feature, feed rate. There's all kinds of stuff that you can see there. And you can also load that from your G-code file. So if you right-click, for instance, on a file there and just click 3D view or view in 3D, it's going to load. And there you go. You have your file loaded and you can analyze what's going on. You'll notice also that is the new feature that I think is going to be very awesome. The time-lapse feature. Now you can see all the time lapses that have been done so far. For instance, I don't know why this one is not showing a thumbnail. I think maybe I forgot to activate that. But if you click on it, now you can load your time lapse directly inside the interface and see what it looks like. Awesome stuff. I like it so much. They honestly, Mainsail team did a very good job on this release, and it's very nice. So everyone that wants to participate in the beta testing, I'll show you how to install that. There's all sorts of new features included in that. You'll notice also a lot of stuff is different in the configuration. But again, we're not going to go through all of this today. We're just going to focus on the time lapse. And to do that, we're going to switch to my other printer, which is the Voron. I didn't update yet, so you can see I'm still running 2.0.1. So the steps to be able to install time-lapse and make it work is very easy. Just so you know, this printer already has a time-lapse function enabled. It was a bit more tedious on the older version because you had to do it all manually. You had to configure your moonraker file, and it was done manually. I had another video that was explaining how to do that. But now it's very easy, so everyone can do this, and it works great. And the first thing you will need to do is to set your Mainsail or your moonraker configuration to be able to go grab the beta version. So you edit your moonraker.conf, and under the update manager, if you don't have this section, please add it. This is what's going to keep it up to date. And that's how you can get updates on everything, moonraker, Mainsail, Klipper, everything. So just add _beta and save and restart. And what that's going to do, if you hit the refresh button for checking new updates, there you go. It found that we now have a beta version that we can install and make it, install and make it work. So let's just click on update. I think just before we do that though, let's just update Moonraker to the latest version. Okay, so Moonraker has been updated. Now we're just going to update Mainsail to the new 2.1. Should be pretty quick. There you go. All right, so we have installed the latest Mainsail beta 2.1. So we are ready to continue and install the time-lapse plugin or installation. I don't know if they call that a plugin anymore, but component. Yeah, that's how they call that now. Okay, so what you're going to use and what you're going to need, sorry, for this step is your favorite SSH client and connect to your Raspberry Pi. And then you're just going to CD to your home folder. And you're going to need to download the Git file and clone it. So you can use this command. It's going to get it for you. And it should have cloned it. Now you need to run the installation script. And this script will do everything for you. It's going to stop services, install everything. So it's done. Pretty quick stuff. Quick note, if you were already running Timelapse before with the old way, you will have, well, you had a file under, where was it? Mainsail. And then, no, not Mainsail. It was a moonraker component. So under moonraker, and then again, moonraker, and there should be a component folder. Yeah. So if you were running Timelapse before, you had already a file in there called timelapse.py. Now this new installation script will completely get rid of that file, and it will rename it or recreate a new symbolic link pointing to a new folder called home.py moonraker timelapse components. And then this is where now the time-lapse script will reside. So if you had it running before, no need to delete, no need to do anything, just run that script. It will update it for you and put the new symbolic link, and you'll be ready to go. So now it's installed. There's a couple more things we need to do. The next thing is to update Moonraker with the configuration to have the time-lapse auto update. If you go under your printer and go under machine, this is the update manager, and there's going to be a new time-lapse update manager for the plugin. So when there's an update, you can update it. So we're just going to go under Moonraker, and back to this side, we can copy paste directly under this section. There's going to be a new update manager, and just save and restart. And you'll notice now that there's going to be this guy. So it's up to date now, and that means it will auto update when there's an update. Just a quick note concerning Moonraker and how it does its update now. It's going to do and check for updates every 28 days, but you can still use this guy and check for manual updates. So that way you don't have to wait 28 days to see if there's a new update. Good. So now the next thing that we need to do, if we just go back here, the next thing is the configuration. So we're just going to click configuration, and to activate the time-lapse feature, we need to tell it, because if we go just back to the printer, you don't see any time-lapse here. You don't see any time-lapse under the interface settings. So we need to activate that. Now, if you were like me and were running time-lapse before, you already had that section under Moonraker. For this video, I completely deleted it before just to show you, but that section still is available. Just a quick note, and if you read through this article, you'll see you can still define stuff under time-lapse there, but it's going to take over all the settings that are done through the GUI. So what I prefer to do is just not define anything. Let's go back to our printer. Under Moonraker, we're just going to add this section and call it time-lapse and restart service. And you'll notice that there's going to be a new time-lapse section here. Again, like I said, if you had all the configuration under moonraker.cfg, like you can configure all kinds of things in there, this is going to take over whatever you configure under the GUI. And honestly, you can do it, but I honestly prefer to do it now from the GUI, and I'm going to show you that in a moment. So you now have a new time lapse section, and in my case, there's already a lot of time lapses that are stored under my Raspberry Pi. And the cool thing now is that you can just watch them. Um, and something about the older way of doing time lapse is that you had to tell the render process to reverse the camera if your camera was upside down and so on. But with the new version, and I'm going to show you that right now. If you go under the configuration here, you'll see time lapse. And this is all the configuration and the options that you can configure for the time lapse. And just a quick note: instead of reversing the camera under the moonraker config file, like all these settings, now how it's doing it, it's going to take whatever configuration you have for your camera. So in my case, if I had to flip it, whatever, this is exactly how it's going to take it for the rendering. So you don't need to add extra parameters now under the moonraker config file to flip the camera or to, whatever. It's all done, and it's going to take the default settings for the camera defined as is in this section. So, well, obviously, you need to define your camera first. So under time lapse, let's go through quickly go through all the settings. So obviously, you need to enable that. Auto render. What you need there is, would you like to have the movie render at the end of your print? I'm personally not using that, and I'm going to explain you why. In my case, well, first of all, the auto render, if you add that enable, it's going to run again after the print is done, but it's only going to run after all the end G codes are executed. If you're like me and you shut down the printer under your ending G codes, it means that the auto render will never execute, because it will execute only after all the print is done, and that means after all the ending G codes are executed. If you shut down the printer before that, the render is not going to run. So what I do, I run the render manually with calling the macro in my ending G code, and after that, it will shut down the printer. So if you have a shutdown macro inside your ending G codes, don't do the auto render there, because it's not going to be executed because of this reason. And now we need to select which camera we want to use, because now in this version, you can define multiple cameras. And I'm going to show you, there's an article here. If you go under the Mainsail website, multicam. And good thing to note, compared to the older version of the OS that I'm running right now, the config file for the camera is going to be stored under the home pi Klipper config. You're going to see a webcam.txt, and this is where you can set different parameters for the camera. For instance, the resolution, the frame per seconds, and that kind of stuff. So if you want to run a higher quality time lapse, this is where you're going to have to define that. Now, keep that in mind, that if you put more resolution on the camera, then when you're when you're under the dashboard here, it's going to try to keep the frame per second as high as you define it under the camera settings here. I've personally set it to 15, but since I'm running 1080p resolution for great quality time lapse, it's only able to render like 2 frames. I mean, you're gonna see it as 2 frames per second, which if you move the printer, you're gonna see it's pretty choppy. So keep that in mind. If you crank up resolution, it's normal that you will see the camera act like that. But it's going to make a nicer time lapse. So I don't really care if it's only running slow frame per second there on this section. So back to our time lapse configuration, we have selected the camera. We have disabled auto render because we're going to execute that from the G codes. Now there's two modes that you can run with time-lapse now, the layer macro or the hyperlapse. Layer macro, the name says it all. It's going to take a shot from the camera at each end of each layer. So every layer means a photo. Um, if you run the hyperlapse, it's going to take a screenshot, not a screenshot, but a camera shot every 30 seconds or whatever the timing that you want to set. So it really depends on how you want to do the time lapse. I like to do it by layer. And then there's the preview image. So you can save a preview of the image. So that way you can see thumbnails under this guy. There's no thumbnails here because I didn't have that option before because it was running the older version of Timelapse. If you want to see what it looks like, let's just use my my other printer, and you see there's a little thumbnail there for that. So this is the option that you see here, preview image. Now you can also store all the frames and zip them. This is the option here. If you want to use something else to render the video, like Lightroom or any other editing video editor, you can store that on a zip file, and then you can download it later and do your own rendering. So that's another option that is there. The G-code verbose is if you want to have everything displayed in the console. You'll see when it's taking a shot, you'll see when it's rendering. So it's cool to have, but if you find it annoying, you can disable that. Now, a very cool option that they added is now you don't have to define the part mode under your slicer configuration. In my case, previously, when I did the time lapse, I was instructing the slicer at every layer to move the print head at a certain place, take a shot, then resume the print. Now it's done automatically with this feature. So you set it on. There's many options where you want to put the print head, and it's just going to execute that default pause, and it's going to resume that. So you have the options at what speed you want that print head to move, the speed of the retract, because obviously you don't want the print head to ooze when it's doing the screenshot, not screenshot, but the picture, and how much you want to retract. Again, when it's gonna extrude back. So what I like to do normally, I can crank that speed. I like 100. Depending on your extruder, you're gonna have to configure that. Travel speed, I do like 500. I have a speedy printer that works good. I like to retract. 1 is probably enough. You'll have to test depending on your hot end. And then once it's done, it's gonna I'm gonna put 100 as well, and it's gonna again extrude 1. But I like to do 0.95 because that way there's less oozing when it's not gonna leave a blob on the print when it's gonna resume. But these are all configurable. Keep that in mind. It's really depending on your hot end on your printer, and every printer is different, obviously. So the rest there is pretty basic. You can leave the default there. 30 frames per second is good, but you can play with that. The constant rate factor, everything there is configurable. If you want to rename the file to something else, that's good as well. But I normally leave the default there, and it's just going to do good. And now you can just exit out of it. And like I said, the time lapse will be stored under where is it? Moonraker time lapse. If you go to Moonraker time lapse, this is directly under time lapse. This is where all the time lapses will be stored. All right, so there is one last thing we need to configure before we jump to the slicer part. And if we go back to the configuration article on GitHub, if we scroll down at the bottom, This is all the parameters that we're not going to use because we do it from the GUI, but you can do it from there. This is what we need. In your printer.cfg, we need to include the new timelapse.cfg file, and I'll show you that in a moment. Just go under machine, printer.cfg, and I normally put my includes at the top. You can do it whenever you like. Let's save and restart. Let's take a look at what is inside that timelapse.cfg. It's defining a couple of macros. That one, get timelapse setup, set timelapse setup as well. This should be this one, timelapse take frame. That's the one we are interested in. And there's another one that should be about the rendering. Here's your hyperlapse, the render, timelapse render. So timelapse underscore render and timelapse underscore take frame. Or if you like to do hyperlapse instead, there's going to be the hyperlapse, but it's not needed inside the slicer. So that was just for your personal information. This is where it's going to take all the macros to execute when you instruct the printer to do it. So now on the slicer part, let me bring my slicer over here. I just have that lovely Benchy. We're going to slice it, and I'm going to show you. This is a idea maker, but you can be any slicer really of your choice. Every slicer has the ability to have layer change G-code. So that's what I'm using here. Remember in the GUI of Mainsail, we set it to use a layer change. So you have to take this guy in your layer change. And prior to this Mainsail2.1, there was no park feature for the time-lapse. So I had to manually tell the printhead to go to a certain place and then take the shot and then resume the printer. Now we don't need this anymore. It's going to take the park settings from the GUI and use that. So you can modify that directly under the Mainsail interface, which is pretty awesome. So you just need to use that macro on every layer change, and that is what's going to be executed after every layer is done. And that's about it. You're done. If you are like me and you shut down the printer in your ending G-code, like this guy here, then what you need to do, you need to add the timelapse underscore render inside your slicer. Otherwise, if you set the GUI to say auto render, it will only auto render at the end of the print, which means after it execute all the ending G code. And if you shut down the printer here, it will never execute the render. So do like me. If you shut down the printer, put the timelapse render inside your G code. And I normally also use a dwell command for 5 minutes. It means it's just going to pause for that amount of milliseconds. That means it's going to leave enough time to cool down the printer. It's going to leave enough time for the Raspberry Pi to execute the render. If the print job is pretty huge, it takes some time depending on your Raspberry Pi. If you're running version 2, version 3, or Pi version 4, it's going to take different amount of time depending on the processing power of your Raspberry Pi. So 5 minutes in my case is enough to process all the render. So you'll have to check if you're shutting down the printer how much time it needs to render the time lapse. So that's about it, guys. You're ready to run some awesome prints and do some awesome time lapse, and that's as easy as that, really. So let's try to do one. I'm going to show you one and see how the parking is done. And I have set mine. I'm going to use my my VZBot for that one. And again, about just me restart this guy. This is the verbose, whatever you call that. But this is a setting you set when you are here and where is it? Not rendering. This guy here. When you activate that, you're going to see all these on the console, which is, if you find that annoying, you can turn it off. So we're going to launch a print on the VisiBot and see if the parking and everything, what it looks like, and that will be good to watch. All right, I have sliced a file, an STL, and it's ready to print. I just want to show you that now on every print that you're going to launch now, you have the option to either enable or disable the time lapse, so you don't have to go and remove that from your slicer every time. You can do it directly from the Mainsail interface, which is a very cool feature. I like that a lot because sometimes you want to go quick. You don't want to take time to take time lapse or whatever. You don't need time lapse. Just disable that. Another quick note before we launch that print, we had a little issue on the time lapse when we were parking the print head at the center, like I'm doing right now. There was a little feature added, and this is the guy here, the stream delay compensation, and there's another one at the bottom here, the park time. It will have a tiny delay of 0.1 second or whatever value will work good for you. It's only if when you do the time lapse, you will see in your video that the print head will not be stationary at exactly at the park in the middle or wherever the position you choose to use. In my case, I'm using a Raspberry Pi cam, and since I'm doing a very quick park, like at 500 millimeters per second with a lot of acceleration, I had issues on the time lapse where it was the print head was not staying stationary in the movie. It was moving quite a bit. So having that delay will prevent that from happening. So keep that in mind. If you have that issue running your time lapse, you'll have to play with the delay. The default should be plenty enough for your setup, but if you're crazy and you go super fast, this is where you're going to have to tune it. Just have to increase maybe one of the value. I would start with the park time and then see if that helps, and then play with that, play with the other one, and see how it's going to affect the time lapse. Which is something really cool about Mainsail team, is that they are there, they respond. There's an issue, they work on it, they fix it, they push an update. There you go, you have a fix. So there's a lot of flow in their releases, and they're always happy to help. So which is I find very, very, very nice from them. So let's just launch this guy and start the print. And you'll notice if you go to time lapse here, it's not available now, but if you'll notice that on your side, you will see information about time lapse going on here. So I'm just going to put the camera on the print so we can see how it's going to park the nozzle and what it does. So that's going to be next. So let's just take a look at it. All right, print is starting, and what we should see here is a park in the middle of the printer or the print surface at every layer change. So that's what we're gonna see, hopefully, if that works. And it will work, obviously, because I've tested it before making this video. Alright, first layer done. It should do a park nozzle and take a picture. There you go. Awesome. So, okay, we're just gonna let it go like that, and I'm not gonna film throughout the entire video. Let's just take a look at the time lapse and see what that does. Awesome, we got this awesome time lapse, and you can also see it under time lapse here, and you can also take a look at the video right into the Mainsail GUI, which is pretty cool stuff. If you got this far in the video and you got time lapse working, give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe. There will be more content like this in the future. And I'd like also to point out that if you enjoy Mainsail and you're happy with the development of the product, those guys do it for free. So if you want to support them, I'll put a link down in the description. Feel free to just drop them a coffee. No, not drop them a coffee. Give them a coffee. They use Ko-Fi, so pretty easy stuff. If you want to support them, they will be very, very happy, and that will encourage them to keep going on with this awesome project. So if you got this far, it's now time for the last step. You reward yourself with a cold beer or your favorite rum and coke, and be good. On this, I hope to see you in the next video. Take care, everyone, and thanks for watching. Bye-bye.